Sam Altman says that the average ChatGPT query uses around 0.000085 gallons of water, or roughly 1/15 of a teaspoon. But then at the same time, somehow a Morgan Stanley projection predicted annual water use for cooling and electricity generation by AI data centers could reach around 1,000 billion liters by 2028. That's 1 trillion liters, an 11-fold increase from 2024 estimates. AI water use is extremely easy to mislead people about for a few different reasons. And one of them is that the average American has not updated their understanding of what water use is since they were in elementary school. And this is fine. We don't all need to understand this stuff, but then it gets dragged into the discourse, and of course we all talk out of our asses while experts rub their temples from the sidelines. So look, as far as I can tell, though OpenAI does not let people inspect the sources of their data, both of these numbers are true. 1/15 of a teaspoon per query and 1 trillion liters of water per year by 2028. And you might think, okay, well, Morgan Stanley must just be imagining a future where there's a tremendous number of queries. But no. Actually, no matter how you multiply 1/15 of a teaspoon, you're never going to get anywhere close to 1 trillion liters of water use. The thing is, water consumption analysis, indeed any resource consumption analysis for an industry or a product or a conversation with a chatbot, is really tricky to do. There are multiple fields of economics and science devoted to this. If you're going to try and package that up into some nice, neat numbers that the average person will understand, you're going to be fudging a lot of stuff. So this seems like a good time to actually get into why it's so hard. But first, this video is brought to you by a little outfit called Ground News. Ground News is a website and app that pulls coverage of the same story from tons of different outlets from all over the political spectrum and all over the world. And they show you the differences in headline language, in political leaning, in factuality, even who owns the outlet. And that transparency can make it much harder for any one narrative to quietly settle into your head unchecked. I'm sure you're going to be shocked to hear this, but I believe this is a better way to get the news than just letting whatever is the most inflammatory thing that is getting the most clicks and reshares and being amplified by algorithms be the thing that enters your brain. And weirdly, as I'm recording this, like I'm about to upload this video today, there is a news story about Trump and AI regulation. Trump says he will sign an executive order this week. So not a law passed by Congress, just an executive order that the president has created all on his own on the AI approval process, which is, I guess, one way to say it. This story has been covered by a lot of outlets, more on the right than on the left, but pretty decently both sides. Now I can click see all here and I can find outlets that I like Reuters, and I can click and read that over on Reuters in a place that's not breaking Reuters' business model so they can keep employing journalists to do this work. But it says President Donald Trump said on Monday that he would sign an executive order this week that would create a single national rule for artificial intelligence, which the industry has said is necessary to override disparate laws passed by U.S. states. You could see one way of interpreting this. Trump says that he will sign executive order blocking state AI regulations despite safety fears. And you could see a version of this from the right. Trump to issue one rule book AI executive order after Congress fails to curb bad actor states. So it's the fault of Congress here. So that's the kind of thing where you could see a very different version of reality depending on what your news budget looks like. And also, honestly, I'm not sure without using regular news if I would have heard about this at all. And you can subscribe to get 40% off the Vantage plan using the QR code that's been on the screen the whole time, or by using my link, which is ground.news/Hank, which you can also click in the description. So, why do data centers use water at all? So the actual computer chips that do the processing for AI get hot when they run, but also they don't work as well when they get too hot. So you gotta cool everything down so that everything runs optimally and the chips have their optimal lifespan, and you're optimizing everything so you get the most processing power per unit of dollars you spend. Part of that is cooling everything down, and one of the most efficient ways to do that is with water. Many facilities use evaporative cooling, where they literally turn clean water into water vapor, and that water vapor carries the heat away. It's warmer, and it's taking the heat away. Good! Now, that's not the only way you do it. Some sites recycle water, or they use non-potable water, so water that's come out of a sewage treatment plant that you couldn't drink, but most of them still rely on fresh municipal water, the same water that a water company would be delivering to you, they are delivering to them. And this is important because municipal water is a kind of water. And yes, there are many different kinds of water, and the differences matter. Because look, no one's destroying the water here. The water that evaporates, it's just gonna fall down somewhere else eventually. But it does evaporate. It does go away. It is used up. And this is generally clean water that could be used for something else. It's been processed to be clean enough to drink and delivered using the same infrastructure as the rest of the city. And all that processing and all that infrastructure costs money, and it can't handle an infinite amount of water going through the system. This is industrial water use, but it's usually the same water as everything else. It's the municipal water. Now, OpenAI did not release information on where the water use figures come from, but I can make some guesses. First, Sam is talking about the water use per query. But importantly, different queries work different ways with AI. And many queries will actually result in multiple queries you never even see. This is something Sam Altman knows, but it's not something that most people know. Behind the scenes, when you ask GPT-5 a question, it frequently thinks. They call this reasoning models, and it thinks by preparing and sending out other queries and then reading the results of those queries and then sending out more queries, and then maybe it might spur a search of the internet. So if you ask it a somewhat complex question, it will run an initial query and then it will take that response, it will evaluate it using another query. It sometimes runs follow-ups until it's happy with the final answer. All those extra queries are additional queries. So one query might not be one query. Sometimes it is, but sometimes it's a bunch. So this in itself might multiply this 1/15 of a teaspoon by 15. I don't know, of course, because OpenAI doesn't share any of this information. But even in that situation, it's still just a teaspoon. I drink teaspoons all day long. That's, for me, not really the lie in Sam's lie here. And I am going to call it a lie because I think it is. The actual lie is that it is only counting the water used during the part of the life cycle when you're actually querying the chatbot, not all of the other parts of the process that are necessary for this system to exist. This is the big difference between Morgan Stanley's analysis and Sam Altman's. There are a lot of other parts of this process that are not the final step of the consumer querying the chatbot. And you've probably thought of one of them, but you probably haven't thought of the biggest one. And I want to do a test right now and find out if I'm right. So if you thought of one place where the chatbot is using water that isn't the query, you probably thought of the training. The thing about these systems is that the training never really stops, even while we're using one model like GPT-5, which is actually a bunch of models all stuck together. OpenAI and its competitors are constantly training newer, bigger versions that no one can use yet. And to create these models, the system runs for weeks or months on enormous clusters of GPUs, burning through electricity and water for cooling. It's not really fair to treat that training footprint as separate from every conversation you have with the model. The conversation could not happen without the training. So if you wanted to be honest, you got to make some choices. So probably you would want to spread the water used to train all of the models in GPT-5 and spread it across every query people make. Problem here is, no one knows how to do that accurately because OpenAI doesn't share this information, which is part of why it is so easy to get numbers that are both fairly correct and very different from each other. And part of why it's so easy to lie about this, from either direction, by the way. You could include every training that has ever happened leading up to GPT-5, since certainly GPT-5 would not have been possible without those training events. Or you could just include the training of the models that are part of GPT-5. Or you could also include the training of models that are not being used yet. You could say if people didn't like and didn't use this product, then those training events wouldn't be happening, and so we should include those too. All of those different choices will yield different results. If you want the number to look small, you could do that. If you want the number to look big, you could do that. And the training is a very big part of what makes these things work. Once you make a model, an individual query isn't that hard, but building the models is very energy intensive. According to estimates from the University of California, the training of AI models can account for around 50% of their total resource use. The training is big. And weirdly, Sam seems to have decided to not include it when discussing the water use of a ChatGPT query. Because look, it is true that any individual query doesn't use that water. With resource use analysis, you have to decide where to draw the line. But look, anyone doing actual analysis would definitely include the training because it's obviously a needed part of the process. But of course, this is messy. The more a model is used, the more the training cost in dollars, electricity, and water gets distributed across queries. That training water has already been consumed. It isn't being consumed anymore. Though, again, they are always training something new, and they seem to believe very powerfully that future training will be more, not less, resource intensive than current models, since that's the whole thing that's causing them to build data centers the way beavers build dams. The data center build-out is nuts. All of the system we have now works for what we have now. This is all build out for something bigger and better that we assume will materialize. This is a different conversation. Microsoft and Google and Amazon alone are collectively spending more than $100 billion a year on new data centers. I don't know if we could get into our heads how much money that is. But now I want to talk a little bit about what I see as like misleading in the other direction. And it's all going to make sense, but I find it misleading in the other direction. So if you have heard truly massive numbers relating to AI water use, the biggest source included in those analyses, I have not mentioned yet. This one is hidden enough that most people do not think of it. We know that data centers use lots of water, but they also use a lot of electricity. And you know what else uses a lot of water? Power plants, specifically thermoelectric power plants. So a lot of power plants work in the following way. First, you make heat. Then you expose water to that heat, it expands into steam, and that expansion drives past a turbine, and that turbine then spins and that creates the electricity. But then on the other side of this, nobody ever thinks about what happens. It doesn't just vent out into the atmosphere. You actually have to suck the steam through by recondensing the steam after it passes through the turbine. And the way you do that is by cooling off the steam, and the way you do that is by running the steam pipe through a bunch of cold water. So this is how natural gas and coal and nuclear power plants all work. And according to the US Geological Survey, electricity generation accounts for, get this, 40% of all freshwater withdrawals in the United States. Now this is confusing though, because the power plants then just put a lot, not all, but a lot of that water back. So a lot of this water is intake and then return. And also importantly, none of this is municipal water. It has not gone through the process to make it safe to drink. It is not being piped through a municipal water system that would need to scale up to manage this massive need. It is not sent to a sewage treatment plant. It is usually taken directly from a river, a lake, or the ocean, and then released back into that river, lake, or ocean. So some water will be lost to evaporation in this process. I wish I had the number in front of me. Hank from the future here. It's about 2 to 3%. So this is the water that people are sometimes counting if they want AI water use to look really massive. They are looking at the mix of power that AI data centers are using. And then they were looking specifically at the thermoelectric power plants that are part of that. They're looking at how much electricity is being drawn from those power plants, and then looking at what percentage of that power plant's water use can be attributed to the AI data center. And they are looking at water that is coming in and out, not just water that's being evaporated away. Now, I don't want to say that this doesn't matter. Power plants use a lot of water. A lot of it evaporates when the power plants are running. And also, the waste heat that ends up in waterways can have tremendous effects on ecosystems, and that needs to be managed and regulated. Waste heat is a kind of pollution. You can't just dump heat into the ocean or into a river and expect things to go fine. In fact, rivers often, only a degree or two of difference can really mess things up. But including the water that flows through a power plant as water use, it does feel a little wrong to me. Taking water from a river or a lake is different from taking drinking water from a treatment plant. Putting drinking water on your lawn is actually cheaper per gallon for the water company than using it in your sink or shower, because it doesn't need to go through the wastewater treatment process. One kind of use is different from other kinds of use. But of course, even though municipal water and industrial water are not the same thing, that does not mean that water is like unlimited. Every place has a finite hydrological budget. A certain amount of water that can be pulled from rivers, lakes, reservoirs, or aquifers without causing real harm. You could shift where the strain shows up, because maybe it's in municipal treatment capacity, but maybe it's in an overdrawn aquifer, or maybe it's in a river whose temperature or flow is already stressed. But you cannot escape the fact that water is locally limited. A data center drawing from a lake is not competing with households for tap water, but it is drawing from the same watershed. And in a lot of places, that watershed is already fully allocated, but in a lot of places, that's not the case. So the question isn't just what kind of water is it using, it is also, does this place actually have the water to spare? Some places do, some places do not. And this is usually what we picture when we talk about saving water, a finite pool of usable water in a particular place. And that's part of the story, but not the only part, because what kind of water you need can matter just as much, if not more, as how much there is. A great example of this, a lot of water is actually used to make the chips that run non-AI data centers, like those NVIDIA GPUs, a huge amount of water is necessary for the creation of those. And that is part of the life cycle. Now, when you compare that to the water used for cooling, it's very small. But it's a different kind of water. It's not just not lake water. This has to be ultra pure water that has like nothing in it. It's like extremely distilled to make sure that there's nothing in it that could possibly mess up the chips. So it's a very small fraction of the amount of water used in the process of AI existing. But that water is harder to produce than drinking water. It requires way more energy to produce than drinking water. And that's not something that like anybody needs to know unless they're experts working on this problem. Now, most of the water used to cool data centers also doesn't go to sewage treatment plants, just like irrigating your lawn. That water doesn't go to sewage treatment plants. Most of it gets evaporated away, but a fair portion actually does end up going to treatment because once a lot of water evaporates away, minerals don't evaporate away and they start to build up, and then that has to be like blown out before it starts to create a problem for the evaporators. And that has to go somewhere to get treated. In fact, it sometimes needs special treatment because the minerals that are left behind can make it acidic, and you don't want to release a bunch of acid into a river. My point here overall is that this is complex. And that means to me two things. One, it's really easy to mislead about it. It's easy to misrepresent by leaving out training and making the water use seem really small. It's easy to misrepresent by including water flowing through a power plant to make water use seem even bigger than it is. But the second thing that I hope you walk away from this video with is that like I know next to nothing about this. Like I have a master's degree in environmental studies that's old, by the way, this is pre-AI. So I have like some basis from which to start doing the research necessary that I did to write this video. But I still know basically nothing. Like if an expert watches this video, they're gonna see a ton of holes in it. They're gonna be like, that thing's kind of wrong, and like, oh, he forgot about this. Like this is the reason why expertise is so important, because the discourse is terrible at expertise. But there are people who are actually involved in this conservation, who are actually involved in trying to like mitigate this, to decrease the water use. And they are aware that AI is just one of many industrial uses of municipal water, and that is very different from water evaporating at a power plant that isn't coming from municipal water. So here's the crazy part, because any resource manager will tell you that use is one part of the story, and often the smaller part of the story. What matters most is where you're using it, the context around the use. A bunch of data centers in the desert is a totally different game than a bunch in the Pacific Northwest. Water is not like electrons. It is hard to move around. If you use water where it's scarce, it matters a lot more than if you use it where it's plentiful. And it also matters how you respond to that. When you build a data center in the desert, do you make sure you're running your cooling with non-potable water from a treatment plant? Is that taking away from water that would normally be used for turf irrigation? And now the turf is being irrigated by municipal water? Or maybe you're responding by building systems that recycle the water. Or maybe you're responding by using air cooling, which might use more electricity, but that's fine if there's a lot of solar nearby. To wrap this up, let me hit you with something that is very, very weird. AI data centers are going to use a lot of water, but they are not going to use anything like as much water as the weirdest industrial use of water that we have. It is so weird. I hate it so much. Corn is one of the thirstiest major crops grown in the US. On average, it takes between 600,000 and 1 million gallons of irrigation water to grow an acre of corn, depending on rainfall and region. Corn uses orders of magnitude more water than AI. According to the US Department of Agriculture, US corn production requires around 20 trillion gallons of water per year, compared to the total estimated global AI data center water use of around 260 billion gallons. In other words, American corn alone uses nearly 80 times more water annually than all of the world's AI servers combined. And I totally forgive you if you are thinking right now, okay, Hank, yes, but corn is food. We eat it. Food is very important for people. But that's the thing. We don't eat it. Maybe 1% of corn is eaten by humans. A lot of it is eaten by livestock. But 40% of it is burned in our cars and trucks. That acre of corn that evaporated 1 million gallons of irrigation water will get you roughly 500 gallons of ethanol. So before we even talk about processing, every gallon of ethanol already carries an irrigation footprint of around 1,500 gallons of water. Extend that to 40% of the US corn crop, and yeah, it is tens of trillions of gallons of water being evaporated by corn so that we can burn it to move our cars and trucks around. But also, take a step down, there are different kinds of water, and this is not municipal water. But if the water passing through a power plant counts as water use, then I think it's fair to say this does as well. And also, you want to know what definitely uses municipal water? The trillions of gallons of water that we use to irrigate our lawns every year. I find this all very interesting. When we talk about water use, it makes sense that you and I don't have a deep understanding of all of this complexity. You do not need to have the level of complexity that you now have having watched this video. I don't really need to have it either. The reality is, some areas are right up against their hydrological budgets. They can't have new uses. Others have room. Some uses, like irrigating the entire corn belt, involve staggering amounts of water that we've just learned to see as normal. And I get why people jump on AI water use. Wasting water feels immoral. We are told our whole lives to turn off that sink while we brush. And that feels so inconsequential next to industrial use. And industrial use, honestly, feels inconsequential next to agricultural use. In specific places that are up against their hydrological budgets, it can absolutely make sense to not add new use and to save every bit we can. Building a water-cooled data center in Tucson is just very dumb. It's a bad idea. It's dumb as shit. But on the whole, I think there are people who understand these systems much better than I do, who will be working on the resource planning and doing an okay job of it. And with water use specifically, now, it's going to be a big deal in some areas. I don't want to say it's never going to be a big deal. Like, I don't want people to come for me. Even under the maximalist goals of AI companies, the projected increase in water use is small compared to what cities and industries already use. What I am much more worried about is that the projected increase in power demand is not small. It is an order of magnitude larger in like the percent of existing infrastructure. That's going to hit our carbon budgets and it's going to hit our wallets. I think this is a bigger deal politically. I think it's a bigger deal environmentally. That's where I am more focused personally. Like maybe water use feels more salient because it feels worse to waste water. But in terms of actual impact, on average, I think that the power is going to be the bigger deal. But it's also very hard to compare them, right? Because like river health has very little to do with your power bill. Like those things are very separate problems from each other. But honestly, even more than either of these things, I remain really unconvinced that these planned build-outs are actually going to happen. And if they don't, we've got this other set of very big problems. Like if we've spent like $1 trillion on NVIDIA chips, and it turns out the compute isn't needed because more compute doesn't actually improve these systems as much as advertised, or because environmental or political constraints slow everything down, then my bigger concern is that we will have swallowed a story that is, I know, like exciting and compelling. Like, I don't want to say these technologies aren't interesting, but like maybe not as immediately world-changing as the billionaires racing each other around seem to think. And if we have bet like a fairly large percentage of the S&P 500 and also quite a bit of our current economic growth on this future that just doesn't materialize immediately, even if it does eventually, but not immediately, my biggest concern, is this bubble popping. I am worried about that. I think that our entire economy is being wagered by not very many people making very strange choices based on an imagining of the future that is honestly, I don't think likely to occur, which is not the topic of the video, but I ended up here anyway because I started talking about what I'm most worried about. Like, I can't predict the future. No one can predict the future. As Cory Doctorow likes to say, I love this. If you could predict the future, it would mean that we have no agency, and what a terrible outcome that would be. We do have agency. We can affect these things. I remain fairly unconvinced that people are going to continue inviting giant machines that raise their electricity bills while eating jobs into their communities. There seems to be a great deal of debate over whether these tools are actually that useful at all, which I can't find a place in. Like, I just simply don't know. But we cannot predict the future. We cannot even apparently agree upon the present. But yes, in conclusion, resource analysis is complex, the incentives are weird, and we have a very long history of underestimating how dumb corn ethanol is. And all of that combined means that it is very easy to lie about AI water use. Thank you for coming to my TED Talk. Goodbye.